The French battleship Charles Martel was one of 5 similar pre-dreadnoughts built for the Marine Nationale at the end of the 1800s. These ships existed during a period when naval vessels became obsolete almost as soon as they launched, and the whole class served for only around 20 uneventful years. The Martel herself was decommissioned in 1914, just a year after the Congo was commissioned. I love the aesthetic of this ship and the sisters. Everything from the aggressive tumble-home hull to the massive tiered masts make her look more steampunk than any fantasy design. Sadly, the relatively small size, half the length, and less than half the displacement of the Congo doesn't quite allow 1:350 to capture too much detail, but I really wanted to stay in scale with my earlier 2 battleships. Unlike the other 2, I only built a waterline model this time, for reasons that will become clear. The limited size and scope meant that the Charles does not have any moving features other than swiveling turrets and casemates. That being said, I don't like building static models either, so I made a box with some faux water on which to display the ship. Turning a removable crank moves the model up and down and rocks it back and forth. The motion uses a wave stepping mechanism, where one crank elevates the ship and water, and another crank tips it. A worm gear stage provides the torque and speed for the ship to move smoothly and slowly, though a relatively massive counterweight, an RCX with some batteries, helps a lot. Of course, I can drive everything with a motor rather than a crank, which leads to the obvious final form. Several years ago, I built my original wave stepper, a GBC module using a similar mechanism. It also used my autodozer boat and took up tons of space. I had considered rebuilding it, but I made up my mind after finally bringing it to a recent lug meeting. I saw that a full input could cause balls to jam around the ship, and the technically self-clearing module would not cycle fast enough to prevent further buildup. I had originally envisioned the wave stepper as a single wave step, and I decided to finally implement it this way. Constraining the module to the size of the Martel would increase the width slightly, decrease the length significantly, and reduce the footprint overall. The challenge would be balancing the weight of the ship and the sea and limiting the amount of wave stepping to something vaguely realistic. Initial mock-ups suggested that I could get away with 1 stud crank radii for both the stepper and the rocker, assuming I could phase them properly. As such, I originally tried to put the wave crank on the stepper itself, but this proved way too flimsy. Instead, the rocker uses a fixed crank with a longer radius to compensate for the additional movement of the step. Luckily, both cranks can turn in the same phase. Anyway, removing the front and back walls of the base allow balls to flow through, though it still needs an attached input. Synchronizing the lift and the wave keeps the back of the C roughly level with the output at all time, while the front dips below and rises above the loading ramp. Despite its shallow depth, the double width of the input allows it to hold much more than the standard 30 balls. The counterweight reduces load on the drivetrain, but it also prevents the back of the C from sagging below the output. I experimented with various stacks of bricks, but I needed something heavier besides official weight bricks. The RCX with batteries weighs about 300 grams. The ship and the C weigh about 400 grams, but the asymmetric bell crank connection gives the counterweight a bit more leverage. Finally, the drivetrain still has a shared power shaft running at 1:5 reduction off an M motor. The stepper and rocker run quite slowly at 1:72 reduction, but the mechanism needs time for balls to roll down the ramp. Even texturing the C impedes ball flow too much. The wide channels around the ship should do the opposite, and even if jams do occur, the new module can clear itself like the old one. I'm not entirely sure if it can keep up with a steady 1 ball per second, but it does cycle in about 20 seconds, and it can definitely pass 10 balls per side on a good pull. Still, my self-testing has proven less than reliable, so I think the module will have to prove or disprove itself in a production setting. On that note, this is the end of the video. Please consider subscribing if you like what we do, and have a nice day.